Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today, we are going to document a really special guitar. I know I'm mainly known for doing like Les Pauls and other rare limited editions, which this also is, but if I had to choose a guitar that was a hollow body for myself, it would be one of these things. And it took me a long time to hunt one of these things down, and just about as long of a time to review it. I bought this last year in November, and here we are next year. Let's go ahead and take a look at this thing. This is the 2013 Gibson Memphis Custom Shop Scotty Moore Signature ES2-95. Now, last time I left you guys on this, I had purchased this from a dealer. It was supposed to be mint condition, and it arrived with this giant chip in the body. Now, that seller ended up crediting me $100, which I didn't really feel was fair, but I thought the price on this guitar to begin with was okay. So I just decided to accept it as is, because now we get to learn all about the Scotty Moore ES2-95. So first off, who is Scotty? That might be a blasphemous question for some of you, but he's an American guitarist and recording engineer who had formed the Blue Moon Boys in 1954, better known as Elvis Presley's backing band. Yeah, now it all makes sense, right? So they toured with Elvis for 12 years from 1954 till 1968. And this guitar right here is what birthed rock and roll for a lot of guys. And Brian Setzer calls this the king of rockabilly guitars. But essentially the story goes, Scotty, he was in the Navy and he had purchased an Esquire when he was doing gigs for them. So when he got out of the service and went down to Memphis to do playing, he would have to stand up, and that made things a little bit different. He didn't like his Fender Esquire anymore. So he was seeking a replacement, so he walked past this music store and he saw this brand new fresh ES2-95 put in the window, and he's like, oh yeah, I have to have that. So he traded his Fender in for that, and even though he only used the ES2-95 on like the very early years of Elvis for like 2 or 3 years before he traded it in for a blonde L5 from 1954 that had the Alnico staple P90 pickup, and then later on traded that thing in for a Super 400, this is one of the most iconic guitars that he had because, you know, it was the very early recordings. And anytime you see people talk about an ES2-95, it's always Scotty Moore this, Scotty Moore that. But do you know the history of the ES2-95 before Scotty Moore made it famous? It's actually quite an interesting one that I didn't know until researching this video. So this was actually birthed by Les Paul. They were introduced the very same year as the Les Paul model itself in 1952. And essentially the story goes, Les Paul, the guy himself, and Mary Ford, they were playing a veterans show in Wood Hospital. And there was a patient there that Les Paul promised he was going to make him a guitar just for him, just tell him whatever he wanted. And he goes, you know, I would really like one of them big arch tops in an all gold finish. So when the nurse told Les Paul, this patient is terminal, I mean, he might not last very long, he called up Ted McCarty, he's like, hey, get me one of them ES-175s, paint it gold, and let's give it to this guy. So they did exactly as Les Paul said. They put Les Paul's preferred tailpiece on it, and by the time they got it to him, the guy unfortunately was no longer on this earth. So I think Mary Ford used it for a little bit, but that is what birthed this model. So that kind of gives you an idea of what an ES2-95 is. It's an upscaled ES-175 with 2 pickups. Because the 175 didn't get 2 pickups until 1953. So that very first year in 52, they were very different guitars in that aspect, but not quite all that different after that. The ES2-95 was in production from 1952 through 1959, and after 1957 you could find humbucker version ones, but most of them are P90s because there's only approximately 49 of them made that had humbuckers. The vast majority of them are all gold, but you could find some sunburst, cherry, and Argentine gray finishes, which is basically a dark sunburst color. They swapped over the colors when people stopped buying the gold because it would turn green and whatnot. But comparing later model ES-175s, yeah, it's basically just, you get this fancy little pick guard, you get cream hardware. Once again, it had the Les Paul preferred tailpiece that would be on the Les Paul model, except for it worked correctly for these ones because they had the top carve accounted for it, so you could actually do the palm muting, unlike on the original Les Pauls. However, if you're looking at this one, you're probably like, that looks more like the ES-175 setup. What's going on here, Trogly? So Scotty Moore's, he decided he didn't like the original Les Paul style wraparound tailpiece. So he took that off and put a regular trapeze style tailpiece on it. Then he borrowed this bridge from Gretsch. It's called the Melita Synchrosonic. And it kind of looks like one of those finger tailpieces. It's just supposed to give you better intonation. You have more room for adjustment on these things. And then kind of like on an L5, you've got a floating bridge on it now. So all the time, you'll see people modify these vintage ES2-95s to look like Scotty's. So now let's go back to my vintage one that I've owned before. So the story behind that one is there was a guy in Fort Wayne. I found him on Craigslist. He had one of these ES2-95s. At that time, I knew nothing about it. I didn't know the heritage or who had ever used one. So I was really nervous buying that guitar because I'd never had a big hollow body before. And he also had a refinished blue SG Melody Maker. You can also check that out on my channel. But I think I picked that thing up for like $1,500, and that was an absolute steal. But it was checked in all the right ways, had heavy wear and tear everywhere. The finish on the neck had pretty much been worn off. It had that green aging to it, and it had the ugliest headstock repair you've ever seen. But you know, over the years I've kind of come to appreciate that. But ever since I owned that guitar, I knew there was something special about 295s. That particular one was done up very similar to Scotty's right here, but instead of the Gretsch bridge, somebody just put like an ABR1 style on there with a floating bridge and regular trapeze tailpiece. So I kind of wanted to keep that guitar, but you know, somebody offered me crazy money for it one day, so I let it go to them. Looking back, probably should have kept it though. It was worth more as a player for $3,500, but it did need some work. After like the 12th fret, you couldn't play it, it would just buzz out. But man, did that thing look cool. So ever since that guitar, when I found out they did a signature Scotty Moore version, I've always wanted to check one of these things out. Because apparently they had gotten access to his original one, so they could take some measurements of the body. Now, according to this interview at a NAMM show, they didn't actually dismantle it and take super detailed specs like they do today. Because apparently they got access to his original one from whoever owned it, because Scotty, he would just trade his guitars in. He wasn't necessarily a collector. The only thing that he noted in that video was there's like a strange hump on the body by the toggle switch that most of these did not have. So that's something that they replicated on this one to make it special. But they had created 81 of these to celebrate his 81st birthday. And he signed every single one of them right here on the top. But be careful, this is not under a clear coat. They thought this was an artwork piece. So they said if they clear coated it, it wouldn't be right. So be very careful if you own one of these. If you're ever cleaning it, you don't want to wipe that signature off. Unfortunately, Scotty is no longer with us. He left us in 2016. But these had a staggering price tag of $8,299 brand new, from the best that I can gather from the Internet Archive anyways. It was about $4,000 more expensive than a regular ES2-95 at the time, because they did a special paint job on this. They matched the bodies the best they could. Obviously you have his signature that's on it, and they gave it a fancy smanchy case. So nowadays, Gibson can't reissue this anymore because we don't have Scotty to sign them. They can make other 295s like that. So needless to say, these things are expensive on the used market today. But if you want one of these and you can't necessarily afford this particular model, there was an Epiphone version done in the mid-2000s. I don't know a lot about those. They honestly don't look that good to me, but it does have Scotty's name to them, but not signed. So that is a little bit more affordable, assuming you have $1,000 or so. If you think it's really strange that Scotty didn't get a signature 295 until then, there actually was a very limited production one done in July of 1999. It was a special catalog order only guitar that looked like this. There's rumored to only be about 15 of those out there, and it didn't have the Melita bridge. It actually had an arm guard on top of it, and it appears to actually have had gold hardware. So not an exact replica of his, but it looks like the first one didn't even have his regular specs. But that's one out there for the serious dedicated collectors. But first impressions of the 295, it's a nice big 50s neck. It's just a nice, boisterous kind of acoustic. I mean, it's an archtop guitar. This is nowhere near as good as my 50s vintage original one that I had, at least not from my head. But it's so iconic and great. It's a full-on gloss finish. It's actually a special finish, too. Like, it's not only aged on the top, but the gold that they used on this is different than any other 295, which is kind of a shame when you have a big ding in the finish, because normally it'd be easy if it was like a black guitar. You could just have somebody touch it up. up, and I'm sure there's the right guy who could get the perfect match of the lacquer on here to touch that up, because that's all it is. It doesn't look like it's actually an impression in the wood. Maybe a very small one, but it should be pretty easy to repair with the right guy. But what happened to this is it had to have been when they were packing it away in the case, this came down and shapoom. It's the exact same size, because this lid does want to fall. You have to make sure it doesn't. But thankfully, the shop was able to find the COA, which was missing when I first got it. And that's kind of a big deal on this model because, as you can see, this is not any normal COA booklet. This thing is giant. It's got Scotty Moore's name. It looks like screen printed on the front. You open it up, you have this giant certificate of authenticity, Scotty Moore ES2-95, and they numbered them out of 81. So I've got serial number 25 right here, which I'm happy with. I mean, if it's not the first one, and if it's not the last one, doesn't really matter to the value, but 25, that's not too bad. But you also get a Scotty Moore signed portrait right here of when he was playing with his band. You've got Elvis there and his original 295. That's just such a beautiful thing. I think the reason why Gibson doesn't do giant COA booklets and make them super fancy is because they don't fit in the case, so people lose them. As found when this thing was packed up originally. But you also have this little photo in here with Scotty right there signing one of the ES2-95s from this run. And it tells you a little bit about it. And here's the part where they tell you what I was telling you earlier. Be very careful when you clean this guitar. There's nothing over top of it. You could wipe that signature off because he just used a paint pen on all these. And you also got a little pre-pack checklist in here. So this was 8/1/13 when they did this. And hey, did I mention the case? These things came with a custom Lifton style case. So it's got the clasps on each side, a single actual latch, and it's a super curvy top. I mean, do you guys see how curved that is? I think you'll be able to see better in this camera angle. I mean, it's got a very big arched top to it. And even the back has some curving to it to really protect that guitar. I mean, it's just a very vintage-looking Lifton case here, but yet at the same time pretty new. I'm surprised they didn't have a Scotty Moore screen printing on the top of there. And apparently this just comes out of the case if you want it to be... Oh my goodness. That's really cool. I wish Gibson would still do that. So to be period correct, you should only have one neck rest, but they put the second one in here. So you can have the option of a protective case or a historically accurate case. So a quick summary. These are a collector's guitar. They made 81 of them. Scotty signed each of them. They're a really cool collectible guitar. So to learn more about this, let's go ahead and throw this on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. Inside the Scotty Moore ES2-95, let's dig in. Haven't had one of these on the workbench before. So, our pickups in here are just regular dog-eared P90 pickups. They're nothing special, custom wound to his guitar's personal specs or anything like that. They're just the standard ones that all these would get. But that's what they look like on the bottom, but you might be like, hey, what's all this wood stuff? So this is a big arch top guitar, and in order to get the bridge pickup to the height that it needs to be, so it's not a super weak pickup, they have to put this wooden spacer block underneath it. And the wooden block gets secured to the pickup by this, so normally when you have it all screwed into your guitar, it's all good to go like that. And then those holes then continue on into there. But you're going to notice these are double dog-ear P90 pickups. That means they have the mounting brackets on the side instead of like the solid body soap bar style P90s that mount in between these two. I've always loved the look of double dog-ear guitars because it's just so fancy and in your face. Within the circuit, I get 6.96 k ohms in the bridge, neck position 6.95, then the middle, just for fun, 3.48. But now let's go spelunking and break out the endoscope. Alright, let's go through the bridge pickup cavity. Inside the guitar, it looks like some sort of maybe a mahogany kerfing to the edges. And then I'll be honest, I have no idea what that's there for, but again, this is the first time I've went into one of these things. Almost looks like a black fabric strip. Anybody who builds these guitars, I'd be interested to know what that is. Looks like that is all around this instrument. But here we can see the output jack. It looks like they reinforced that area with a little bit more wood so you don't accidentally crack it. That is very common on vintage ones. And then down here is our bottom strap pin. That's kind of an interesting one because it's a white button. I'll show you that on the back side. But there we can see some bracing along the top. And this right here is our ground wire. If we were to take off our bridge, you know, the trapeze bridge, you would see that on the other side. But continuing on around the other edges, it's pretty much more of the same stuff, kerfing on the top and the bottom and those black stripes. But now we'll go in through the base side F-hole. Down here you can see your serial number stamp, ES-295 Scotty Moore. They numbered it here as well, 25 out of 81. And we'll head on up towards the neck, which I believe that is what we're seeing right there, the neck inside of the guitar's body. And then the cutaway areas, they're not quite as sharp as on Les Pauls and whatnot when we have chambered out ones, so doesn't look like anything too crazy there. But I suppose we should check out that Florentine cut. Yeah, it looks like it gets that little wooden bracing right there. And then that would be the neck. So it appears the way these are constructed are maple poplar maple layers, just like an ES-335. And then they have the spruce bracing on the top here, which I suppose we could take another look at here. So it's kind of like what we saw in that Acoustasonic Telecaster, the Made in Mexico ones not too long ago. It's got that like a ladder bracing system right there for the top. I wonder if they put that there to help form that carved top or just to give it some more strength, because the bottom side of the instrument does not have any of that. And the back has some carve to it, so I don't know. I don't know how to build guitars. I just like looking in them. And since this is such a big guitar, we can actually, you know, see the electronics a little bit better. Looks like we've got the Bumblebee capacitors in here. Very nice, vintage specs, and wired up nicely. Okay, now that we understand the insides, let's take a look at the rest of the hardware. So the Melita bridge, it's not pinned to the top, but you can see where it's like scuffing against the VOS finish, so that tells me where I should put it back so I didn't feel too scared taking it off. This thing is strange, like, why? I don't understand why you would ever need these things to move, but they're on a little roller bar right there. I mean, maybe it's for if your neck is at a slight angle or something. I don't know. This is from Gretsch World. I don't know too much about those. But they're basically just like giant ABR1 thumb wheels. And then I was thinking this was going to be like an ebony wood, but it actually appears to be a plastic material. And then that is just all joined together by this metal frame. But now what's going on with this bridge? So it's got the name right there, Synchrosonic Bridge, but like how does it work? I was very, very confused until I actually started to tinker around with it. So you've got 6 screws on here. These are adjusting your individual saddles, which in case you haven't seen them yet, they're these little black things right there. So I was expecting you would turn that and then somehow the saddle would move, but no, you loosen it all the way and then you manually adjust it like this. So do you see how much more intonation room this literally has as compared to an ABR1 bridge? So you can go from there all the way to down there. But that is the Melita bridge in a nutshell there. And then the strings for the tailpiece, it's just your regular trapeze style. So the ball end of the strings just go down here, and then that locks that into place there. Goes over top of your bridge, then you're golden. Literally, in this case. And now the pickguard itself, the beautiful floral inlay. It's like a reflective gold material. They do it with a kind of a clear pickguard, and then that design is just on the back of it. I'm not quite sure what this masking tape is for, but you always got to be careful with this. You don't want to scratch the back of that, or else this beautiful design will get all marred up. And these utilize this black spacer, so it's not just sitting flat against the top. It needs to be risen up to, you know, rest against the pickups, not look too weird. So there's our Scotty Moore Signature. It's kind of signed upside down, but it's his signature nonetheless. And we get 4 controls here, as we were seeing on the inside. Now, unfortunately, there is some internal cracking to these speed knobs, but honestly, these are nothing special. You could just replace them. It looks like 3 of them have internal cracking. But the controls are the same. Volumes, tones. But the entire finish on here is a VOS, so it's got like that, you know, slight scratches in it. It's like basically a buffing compound that just makes the guitar feel kind of old. I'm not a big fan of VOS, but it does give them a certain vibe to them instead of being all shiny and brand new. I mean, it's really evident on the headstock when you see all those like scratches and whatnot from that. And what you're seeing on that bridge post right there is actually, I believe, leftovers from that. There's other fine details like the toggle switch ring right here is really aged looking. You've got some rust to the pole pieces. It's like a semi-aging job essentially. All the screws have an aging compound on them too. And this is all matted over. And another thing to note about these is the neck kind of like just comes in at the top right there. There's like a gap. That's another area where you can see the VOS buffing compound. It's like a reddish material right there. Sure, you could clean it off, but you know, it's kind of part of the guitar. Something else that's kind of interesting about this model is check out the binding. It's got a thick cream, a thick black, and then a small cream layer. So it's 3-ply, but that black layer stands out way more than most guitars that we normally document. Matches well with his signature. 295s are actually pretty big guitars. I mean, look how thick that thing is. We're looking at about 3 1/4 or so deep. Most Les Pauls are around 2, so that just shows you how thick that body is. About a 16-inch bout with an 11-inch upper bout. So that means this is about the size of the bottom of any Les Paul. That gives you a really good frame of reference for just how big these things are. But yeah, apparently most ES-295s don't have this exact shape, apparently, according to that NAMM video. That was something that was kind of weird about his, so they decided to duplicate that on this particular run. I haven't had too many of these 295s. I think this is my second one outside of that 53, but that 53 had many modifications to it. And that one was unplayable after like the 12th fret, so it needed some work. But I hope that gives you a better understanding of this guitar. But moving on from the body, we have a mahogany neck with a rosewood fretboard. Now, if you want to do high meedly licks on these things, sorry, you can't. There are only 19 frets on this one. And also note, these actually did get the fret nib bindings. A lot of the Gibson Memphis guitars did not get fret nibs, so that's a special appointment to this one, despite not being special for this particular model from the vintage era. But the split parallelogram inlays, always love those things. I used to associate this only with like Gibson Doves, and then when I started to get more guitars with these things on, I just love those. But let's go ahead and grab our neck specs here. Nothing funny with the scale length, 24 3/4 inches. With the 12-inch fretboard radius, we have a 1.7-inch nut width, which increases to 2.11 by the 12th. Now granted, by the time you get to the 12th fret, you're really just riding up against the heel and whatnot. So maybe it's a little bit more accurate to take it like around the 9th or 10th fret. Somewhere in between there, it's only 2. So that really widens up as you get up there. But the first fret neck depth is 0.87, and at the 10th fret, it's a big boisterous 1.03. Again, you can't use that reading. This is a big neck, giant neck. Let's go ahead and see it on the contour gauge. Here's that profile at the 1st and 12th fret. I mean, you can see just how rounded it is up in the chording area. Then it flattens out a little bit as, you know, the neck gets wider. But that's a good size feeling, almost baseball bat-like neck. Not quite as huge as like an R7 or R8, but very similar territory. Besides the ding on the front, this is the worst cosmetic blemish. Unfortunately, it is on the side that you see while playing. Essentially, the neck has shrunk just a little bit, and the finish over top of the nut and everything has not, so that's why there's a bit of a bump there. It's just the edge of the nut. Moving on to the headstock, we have our vintage style Kluson tuners. They've yellowed over the lacquer, so it's looking nice. Obviously, we got some scratches here from the VOS process and just general string change wear, but our truss rod is looking good on this one. And we have one of those vintage style historic truss rod covers on these. Very nice. But now, moving on to the backside, I mean, the endoscope kind of showed us everything, so there's no back plates or anything like that. As I was telling you earlier, some of the vintage ones, when people would have something go wrong with it, they would just cut a big area out down here in order to work on the guitars. But stock from the factory, they should look like that. But here is our lone strap button on here, kind of like what you'd find on a Melody Maker. I guess you're supposed to tie it to the top of the headstock or something, but a lot of guys will just sink a strap button right here, there, back the heel, right there, in some location, but this one doesn't have it, so I guess I'll have to sit down to play this one today. But we can check out our sharp Florentine cutaway. You can see it has a top binding right there because it'd be too difficult for them to bend the wood around at that sharp of an angle. But just a beautiful example. It's a shame, you know, something had to happen to the top, but I'm not gonna let it sour this beautiful guitar. Love ES-295s. They're so classy, gold, great looking, and great sounding and playing. You'd think a model like this would actually get a heel cap or something fancy, but it doesn't. It's just a straight up gold neck. And the vintage ones, eventually as you play this so much, your sweat eats into the finish, you rub through, turns green, then it all starts to fall off. But as of right now, this one's nice and minty. But hey, it looks like they might have even reissued the original tuners on here. So at the top it says KLUS, and then the hole in the tuner to lubricate it is the O, and then N, Deluxe. Continues on down there. That's interesting. I don't think I've seen that before. Gibson Deluxe. No serial number back here because you have that sticker on the inside. But I love the way that these tips look. It matches the finish perfectly. They have a nice aged hue. I was telling you in the endoscope that the back also has a belly carve to it. You can kind of see what I'm talking about there. Not as much as on the top, but still a good amount. And I do see like maybe a few small buckle marks back here. Those are not deep at all. They're just kind of like light scratches. And other than that, just the regular VOS stuff. And since this is a used guitar, always important to do a blacklight test. There you can see the chip on the front a little bit more clearly. You can see that the knobs are actually glowing, which is kind of interesting. That means they probably took some time to make those out of the correct materials as like the 50s ones. Maybe. I don't know for sure on that, but our headstock is looking good here, as is the back and sides of the body. Sometimes you gotta watch out for stand rash on collector grade instruments, but I'm not seeing anything like that on this one. Just a nice clean example, except for the unfortunate ding on the front. So it looks like the only spec we have yet to capture is the weight, which in this case is about 6 pounds, 7.1 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. Hey, I found a way to put it on a strap after all. Not the most conventional of methods, but let's get some tones out of this thing. Starting with our neck pickup, let's do some chords. ES-295s always have a nice, deep, jazzy sound to them. And that's without even touching the tone knob, wherever that thing is. Now let's try the bridge pickup, same stuff. Nice and bitey. That'll be good for the rockabilly stuff later on. But let's try that middle position now. Very nice. So very interesting sounding clean guitar. Really like that middle position. Alright, let's go ahead and kick on some distortion. Obviously it's a hollow body, it's gonna do the super feedback thing, so you gotta be careful playing distortion on this, but it is possible. So now that we know all about the Scotty Moore ES2-95, what are my final thoughts on this beast? As far as 295s go, I always have fun playing these things. Maybe not as fun with this one as that true vintage one, but that thing had so much character. It was just oozing out of it everywhere. These are just such fun guitars, especially if you're like me, you generally only gravitate towards Les Pauls or maybe a couple of SGs here or there or 335. This is just something completely different. Now, as far as the Scotty Moore Signature limited edition run, this is not for everybody because they're ridiculously expensive due to the limited nature and the fact that they were hand signed by him at the Gibson factory. There's definitely a lot of collector value within these today, especially since he's no longer with us, meaning we won't see any more reissues of these that are hand-signed anyways. So yes, definite must-have for a collector. However, you can almost get a vintage original for the same price of these. It just, kind of depends on the condition of the original one, if there's been replaced parts, things like that. But I had a great time checking this thing out. It's been a while since I've had one of these beasts, and it's always a pleasure to have one. On the show anyways. I mean, I've owned this thing for a little over a year now. It's just a great big chunky neck. It inspires you to play differently, and I never realized these were 19 fret monsters. That's why they feel so different to play. It's almost a little bit stiffer, but they have great acoustic projection. So troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed checking out this 295 with me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. As always, if you're interested in being the next owner of one of these demo guitars, you can check them out on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. There's some links in the description.